All right, I see it. So it's already time. It's Higia Zman and Aketz Higia. So it's Soraim Tovim, Erev Tov, everybody, depending on where you might be on this planet. Welcome. A pleasure to have you as we do part 3, the finale of Who Knows 4 Experiences, the Rav's Pesach. And I want to again thank Carl and Joel Cohen, who are sponsoring this series in memory of their father and grandfather, Dr. Arthur Cohen, Avram Yitzchak Ben Kalman Mordechai Cohen. And we should have it to celebrate, hopefully, all through the world. I guess that's what they mean on the Shana Haba Yerushalayim. So even if you go to Shalavim or Eilat, that Baruch Hashem in Israel, people can celebrate like Pesach as it's meant to be, and hopefully we'll all be able to do that, and even sooner than next Pesach. Bakasha, Rabbi Adler.
Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Kalman, and welcome everybody who's online and those who may see it afterwards on the archives. Yes, the 4 cups. So I assume everybody brought a bottle to the shir. No, we're not opening up a bar tonight, and we're not asking you to fill up the cups and drink, but we will talk about the rabbinic commandment, the rabbinic mitzvah of drinking 4 cups of wine on Seder night, a rather important and central component of our Seder. Now in the Daf Yomi schedule, they're deep into the last chapter of Psachim, and as it works out, there will be a siyum just in a few days' time, next week, of Masechet Psachim. You couldn't have a better ending of a Masechet right next to the Yom Tov that was just discussed. And just this morning, the students of Daf Yomi studied about the Manishtana and everything that goes with that. We had some things to say about this 2 weeks ago. With regard to 4 cups, it's already mentioned in the opening Mishnah of that 10th chapter of Psachim. Arvei Psachim Samuch LeMincha, on Erev Pesach, close to the afternoon, in the afternoon hours. Lo yochal adam ad shetirshach, people should not eat. The question is, you're not allowed to eat at all, or you're allowed to have nibble on fruits and vegetables. That's not our discussion right now. But the Mishnah tells us clearly, Lo yifchetu lo me'arba kosot shel yayin, a person should not have less than 4 cups of wine. Afilu min hatamchui. There were those people who would receive their food from public kitchens, from poverty-stricken people. They also would have the obligation of arba kosot, of the 4 cups. Now, the reason that this is stated, because there are some mitzvot that are too demanding financially on people. So there are, I would just say, some leniencies for poor people in certain areas. But here, our Chachamim said there's a no excuse rule here, and everybody has to have the 4 cups. And if a person does not have the 4 cups of wine, it behooves the community to guarantee that everybody has provisions for Pesach, and specifically the 4 cups. And basically from this Mishnah came forth the great tzedakah drive, either called Kimcha de Pischa, the flour for Pesach, the Kemach of Pesach, or other names that were given to Mo'ot Chitim, money for the wheat. But it's all a collection, and it should not be exploited by organizations that happen to be raising money for very good causes. It's also very nice. But the specific reason to donate before Pesach was to guarantee that no Jew was left out in the cold without provisions. And this is based on this Mishnah, V'lo yifchetu lo me'arba kosot shel yayin. Certainly he should not be left out without matzah, but even the 4 cups of wine he has to have. So here you have a statement of the importance of the drinking of the 4 cups of wine without any of the details that go into it. When we really get involved in the halakhic sources, so number 1, Rambam, and source number 2, Rambam does tell us what the background of the idea of drinking the 4 cups is all about. And he says, "B'chol dovador chayav adam laharot et atzmo ki'ilu hu batzmo yatsa atam mishibud Mitzrayim." In every generation, a person is obligated to sense the feeling that he or she is going out of Egypt at this time. Vote, as it says, "Va'otanu hotzi misham," and God took us out. So that's a sheer in itself. How exactly does a person develop that sensitivity? But we do certain things to express that sensitivity. God commanded us in the Torah, "V'zacharta ki eved hayita." You shall remember that you were slaves. Klomar, that is to say, "Ki'ilu ata b'atzmacha hayita eved." Just think for a second, if you were a slave and you were released from that slavery, freed from that slavery, where would you be now? What would you be thinking? The truth is that this goes way beyond trying to use some hallucinations here of transporting ourselves back 3,500 years to the days of Egypt. The concept of avdut, slavery, is not only to be measured in terms of lack of or denial of rights, personal rights, and so on, a type of political slavery, which went on in Egypt, no doubt, but there are all kinds of other levels of slavery, and we're going to see that in the context of drinking of the 4 cups of wine. That if there are 4 levels of redemption, as we will see the source in a moment, there must be 4 levels of enslavement. So people are enslaved in all different types. So when you go through the Haggadah, and you talk about Shebechol dor v'dor omdim aleinu lechalotenu, in every generation they try to get us, they try to destroy us. So if there are Holocaust survivors sitting around the table, you don't have to scratch your head and think, what exactly are we talking about, that in every generation they try to annihilate us. They tried to do it in World War II, but they are not only World War II. A person should study history. You don't have to be a professor of history for this. The Torah says in Parshat Azinu, Zechor Yemot Olam Binu Shnot Dovador, study the history. Know what happened to our people and know what happened to the history of the world. It's very, very important. And when you go through the Chadgadia, which is not a children's song. I always say, we've translated in English Haggadot. When I was a child, it was said, one kid, one kid. It's not a kid's song. Chadgadia is a mature adult version, poetic version of Jewish history, where the Chadgadia means that it is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, and Am Yisrael. Ata echad v'shimcha echad umi ka'amcha Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz. It is one and one, HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael. And we go through one event after the other, poetically described by the Chadgadia events. And after each episode of punishment and pain, what was left with Chadgadia, Chadgadia. Am Yisrael, the Jewish nation, is still walking hand in hand with God. And it takes us all the way to the end of history, which is in line with Ramban's thinking, not Rambam, Ramban's thinking, that there will be some type of resurrection, Tchiyat HaMetim, at the time of Messianic days, of Yemot HaMashiach. And that is the last stanza of the Chadgadia, and therefore, what we have is phases of Jewish history, episodes of Jewish history, kol dor v'dor, omdim aleinu lechalotenu, reflecting upon the pasuk in the end of Bishalach, milchama lashem ba'amalek midor dor. Every single generation, there will be an encounter with some type of Amalek. Amalek changes its uniform, its character, but its basic premise of lashmid larogu laberet kol hayudim, as we read in the Megillat Esther, is there in every generation. And you don't have to go too far. Just check out Tehran today. Check out the Hezbollah in South Lebanon. Check out the Hamas in Gaza. There are those who still propose the idea that this is their mission, the annihilation. Oh, they may dress it up and saying, no, they're not anti-Jewish, they're anti-Israel. That's just a interesting way of covering up pure anti-Semitism. But we know that it's cold over there, and hence one can sense at Seder night that we were avadim, we were enslaved in so many different ways, and we were enslaved culturally, and we were enslaved in different manners. And indeed, Pesach is the celebration of the freedom from all kinds of enslavement. And therefore, kol dovador chayav adam laharot et atzmo, he has to demonstrate that he indeed is a free person. So how do we demonstrate this? So Rambam says, and we left, v'yatzata lechirut, v'nifteit, that we left, we went out to some freedom and we were redeemed. Rambam tells us it's done with 2 actions. One is haseva, reclining and sitting in a relaxed way. This is somehow reminiscent of the type of seating arrangement that was done by the elite of the Roman society. I mentioned this 2 weeks ago in the Manashtana talk. It was the slave people. They were the ones who were sitting on chairs at tables. But the elite, the royalty, they were out on a couch. And the idea of having of Mahaseva is an expression of freedom, of letting loose a little bit. And the next, says the Rambam, is the drinking of the 4 cups. Kol echad ve'echad bein anashim bein nashim, man and woman, everyone is obligated to drink on this night, on Seder night, 4 cups of wine. Ein pochatim mehem, not less than 4 cups. We're not going to be stingy here. No, we're not going to cheat. It's got to be 4 cups. Afilu ani hamitparnes min tzedakah. Here the Rambam codifies the law of the Mishnah. Even a poverty-stricken person who has his sustenance come from charity, nevertheless, lo yifkatu lo me'arba'ot tosot. Make sure he has provisions for 4 cups of wine. And then the Rambam gives us the amount, the liquid amount, volume. Shiur kol kosot, kos is a revi'it. So I'm just going to tell you that there's an easy way to know how much is a revi'it. The word kos, kaf vav samach, is the numerical equivalent of 86. So 86 milliliters of wine is considered the minimum shiur of a revi'it for the arba kosot. Translated into North American idiom, that's 3.3 fluid ounces. But there was the Chazon Ish who upgraded for a variety of reasons. It's a shir in itself. And he said that you take the words kos hagun, a proper cup, and a proper cup adds up to 150. So that's almost twice as much. So there are people who go beyond the 3.3 fluid ounces. I remember Rav Moshe Feinstein said that for the arba kosot, 3.3 fluid ounces is sufficient, but for Kiddush, for the first cup, it should be a little bit larger, 4.2 fluid ounces. But all right, that's the question of the amounts, but that's not a philosophical issue here. And then the Rambam tells us that you're going to have the 4 cups, and when he describes the Seder, he's going to explain that we say the bracha Baruch Priagafen 4 times over. Now, the question is the essence of the 4 cups. The essence of the 4 cups. I have a daughter who's no small Talmid Chacham, living up in the north in Israel, Malek Boa. She's a physician and a halachic teacher in a yeshiva, nonetheless. She was studying at the Midrashah in Migdal Oz in Gush Etzion several years ago. That's attached to Yeshivat Har Etzion in Alon Shvut. And she came home one day and said, Abba, do you know why we drink 4 cups? Expecting what I learned in 1st grade, in 8th grade, in 12th grade, there are 4 expressions of redemption. And this is an idea mentioned in the Talmud Yerushalmi. V'hotzeti etchem mitachat ziblot Mitzrayim, v'hotzeti. V'hitzalti etchem, v'ga'alti etchem, v'lakachti etchem le'am, and shall take you as a nation. 4 expressions of redemption. So it's true, there's actually a 5th expression, v'heviti, I will bring you into the land. That will come into play when we discuss the possibility of the 5th cup, correct, Mordechai? The 5th cup. There's a possibility of a 5th cup, not 4 cups. I mentioned 2 weeks ago, we had 4 questions, maybe there are 5 questions. I mentioned last week there are 4 sons, maybe there are 5 sons. And today there are 4 cups, maybe there are 5 cups. So chamisha miyodea, who knows 5, and it might be the 5 cups actually. So you have the 4 cups of wine. My daughter asking me this question, expecting the classic answer because of the 4 expressions of redemption. But no, I did not answer that. I said that Chachamim instituted that for the adjacent to or part of the 4 central mitzvot that are performed on Seder night, they should be performed with a kos shel bracha. Let's define this. Kos shel bracha means a cup of wine that has a halachic definition to it. What exactly is a kos shel bracha? In terms of size, it has to be a little bit washed beforehand. There are many, many different halachot. How you hold it. Kos shel bracha is a halachic phrase, a halachic topic. It's a halachic thing, an object. Kos shel bracha. And not with every mitzvah did our Chachamim join with a kos shel bracha. For example, when you put a tefillin on the morning, you don't take a cup of wine. I mean, maybe if you're chassid, you take a cup of schnapps, but there's no cup of wine that goes with the mitzvah of tefillin. There's no cup of wine that goes with the mitzvah of shofar on Rosh Hashanah, or with the mitzvah of taking arba minim on Sukkot. That's not what a cup of wine is all about. There are specific mitzvot that Chachamim say, do it with a cup of wine. And when you have a cup of wine, you're going to make a bracha borei pri hagafen, and afterwards you're going to drink from the wine. But we're going to see in a moment, the drinking of the wine in many of the examples of kosher bracha is not critical, not critical. What's critical is that the mitzvah was performed over a cup of wine. We begin with borei pri hagafen, we go on to the mitzvah. The classic case of kosher bracha is Kiddush Friday night. Now, Kiddush Friday night, the mitzvah from a biblical point of view, at least the way the Rambam understands it, is to say the words of Kiddush. The words of Kiddush are expressions of praise and glory to God that He created the world. Fine, that's what has to be said. But our Chachamim said that they should be recited over a cup of wine. And the mitzvah is that the person who said Kiddush will taste the wine as well. The tasting of the wine is not a formal mitzvah of drinking wine. If it would be a mitzvah of drinking wine, you'd have to have a revi'it, this measure, and drink the whole cup and at least the majority of the cup. But on Kiddush, the requirement is only what's called melo lugmav, to fill a cheek. Fill a cheek, which means it's a sip. It's a sip plus, not much more than that. And the reason that we actually do drink from the wine after the Kiddush is because, as the Rav explained, it opens the gateway to the Su'udah, the Shabbos meal. That you're not allowed to have a Shabbos meal unless you begin with the Kiddush. So the drinking of that wine at Kiddush time is like the opening shot of the Shabbos meal. That's why we drink. But look, if you have 100 people around the table and one person said Kiddush, and I know that many times they pass around these small cups and everybody gets a little bit wine, not so much from the Kiddush cup anymore because that's impossible, but from the bottles on the table. Fine, it's nice. Everybody takes a little shluck from that wine. But what if somebody didn't take a shluck from the wine? Did he fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush? The answer is absolutely yes, because he heard the brachot, answered amen, had kavanah, had intention to fulfill the obligation, and it's only the person who said the bracha that actually has to take that shluck of wine. Everybody else does it because it's nice, but they don't have to do it. And I'll even go so far. What happens if you only have one cup of wine in the house on Shabbat? One cup, and that's it. And you're making Kiddush, and you sit down after, some people sit for the Kiddush, some people stand, but at least to sit down to drink the wine. You're blessed with an Israeli grandson who kicks the table, and there goes the cup of wine on the floor. I mean, these things have happened before. Do you have to lick up the wine from the floor, from the table? No, you don't have to. Do you have to, if you have on the table bottle from the same wine, you can pour it out and drink that too. And you don't have to make another bracha because you had in mind not only what you have in the cup, but all other wine on the table. But if you don't have that, only have this one cup of wine, that's it. You have to run to a neighbor and go, I don't have wine. No, you don't have to do that. You fulfilled your obligation of Kiddush, because that's what you've actually done. So you missed out on something that's important, but it does not negate the Kiddush itself. That is with regard to Kiddush Friday night, but it's a kosher bracha. Havdalah is a kosher bracha. Under the chuppah, twice we have a kosher bracha. The Rav who says the Kiddushin makes the bracha, and and then says the bracha of Asher Kitshan Musav Tzivan Al Arayot Basar Lanu Terusot Vitel Lanu Surot Lanu Al Yedei Chuppah V'Kiddushin Baruch Ata Hashem HaMekadesh Amo Yisrael Al Yedei Chuppah V'Kiddushin. Who drinks the wine? The classic custom was they give the Chatan and the Kala. That's the classic custom. And the Rav for 1,000 years did not drink the wine and understood that he didn't have to drink the wine. It's only a recent development, and this has a lot to do with the fact that Rosh Yeshiva have taken over the world of halakha from the Rabbanim, who are the guardians of custom. Check out Reb Chaim Soloveitchik's article, Rupture and Reconstruction in Tradition in 1992, and you'll see all about this. The minhag, the custom in Ashkenaz was that the Rav did not drink from the kos shel kiddushin, but in the yeshiva world, it developed an idea that Nevertheless, the Rav should drink it because he made the bracha and so on. The reason the Rav never made the bracha, drank the wine, because the Bar Gafen is not a birkat hanenin. It's a part of the kosher bracha. To make a cup of wine into a kosher bracha, you have to say Bar Gafen. And we just customarily give the chatan and kala to drink. I've had situations where a kala didn't want to drink. It's okay, they're still married. Not a problem. They didn't want to drink. The Ashkenazi custom in Chutz La'aretz, here in Eretz Yisrael, hardly seen at all. On Friday nights, it's a vestigial organ of a custom from Bavel, where the chazan will make kiddush in shul before everybody disperses. But the chazan doesn't, before Aleinu Shabeach on Friday night, but the chazan doesn't drink from the wine. They have kids getting up there and drinking the wine. I remember as a child, wow, 30 kids would line up. The shamus would give everybody a little drop of wine. You came to shul just for that drop of wine. What happens if an adult makes a bracha borei pri ha'etz on an apple and does not eat the apple, gives it to a 6-year-old to eat the apple? That's a bracha levatala. If he said the bracha to train him, to teach him what a bracha is, that's chinuch, that's education. But if he just made a borei pri ha'etz and did not eat from the apple and gave it to a 6-year-old, it's a blessing in vain. So how can the chazan make a bar per gafen and kiddush and then give it to kids? The answer is you don't have to drink it. You don't have to drink it. So because he's not having a meal there, so there's no obligation for him to drink it. But we give it to the kids anyway. So you have kosher bracha for kiddush and havdalah, and for under the chuppah. Under the chuppah we honor 7 people to get up there and say brachot for the birkat nisuin. So who drinks the wine at the end? The chatan and kala. Recently I saw they call up the person who said the first bar pri hagafen. They call him back under the chuppah to take a sip. That is so against the minhag, against the custom. That's not what was done. And the reason is that bar pri hagafen is one of the 7 brachot. It's not 6 plus 1. It's 7. It's 7 brachot. And the first one is bar pri hagafen, creating the kosher bracha status. Now we have this for Brit Milah, we have this for Pidyon Haben. So you have this concept of kosher bracha. And on Seder night, I told my daughter, we have 4 kosot shel bracha. That's what we have. The first one is Kiddush. That's classic. That's Friday night and every Yom Tov. So you have kosher bracha on Kiddush. The second one is on the unique mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, of relating the story of Egypt, because it's quantitatively and qualitatively different than the regular mitzvah throughout the year of Naman Tizko et Yom Tzitcha Me'eretz Mitzrayim Kol Yemei Chayecha, of remembering, making lip service, if you may, to the exodus from Egypt on a daily basis, which we do in the last section of Shema every single day, twice a day even. So in the night of the Seder, it's not just lip service, but it's an elaboration, and that elaboration indeed is unique. So on that bracha, on that mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, what we call Magid in the Haggadah, that's why it's called Magid, you have a kosher bracha, and there's a bar pri hagafen at the end, and we drink it. The third cup is Birkat Hamazon. That's not strange or unique to Seder night. It can be throughout the year. Many times when people have a Birkat Zimun with 10 people, or special occasions, they will use a cup of wine over the Birkat Hamazon. So you do it at Seder night. It's not unique for Seder night. And the fourth cup is unique for Seder night, and that is Hallel. So what's so special about Hallel? Hallel we have for other Chagim, and we have it partially on Rosh Chodesh. The answer is there's no Hallel at nighttime. Hallel is a daytime mitzvah, lagid baboker chasdecha. But in the night of Seder, there's a special mitzvah of Hallel, and it's qualitatively different than the Hallel that we say on all the Chagim in the daytime. And hence there's a kos shel bracha. So you have 4 kosot shel bracha. My daughter's looking at me amazed. She said, Abba, how did you know that? I said, because you heard it in a shir from Rav Meidan, who heard it from Rav Lichtenstein, who heard it from the Rav, Zichron Lebracha. Well, guess what? I heard it directly from the Rav. So it was the same thing, and it filtered down Yeshivat Har Etzion and made it all the way to Migdal Oz, and it's the same idea. And I'll prove it to you that this idea is the halachic basis of the 4 cups. And what we grew up about the 4 expressions of Geulah is nothing but a remez, an illusion, if you may, or some type of sign that will give us some depth on a more philosophical understanding of it. Because as we'll see in a few minutes, the Talmud Yerushalmi offers several of these kinds of responses, keneged arba'a lishonot gula, corresponding to the 4 expressions of redemption. Keneged arba kosot bechalomot shel Sarah Mashkim. You go through Parshat Vayeshev, the butler, he had a dream, which he had the word kos is mentioned 4 times. And it begs for explanation. What in the world the Chazal teaching us with this? And then the Gemara says, the Yerushalmi says, Keneged Arba Malchiot, 4 different empires. That's why we're drinking 4 cups of wine. Obviously, the Chachamim were trying to pin onto the 4 cups all kinds of very important themes to discuss about Yetziat Mitzrayim and the development of Jewish history throughout the ages. But if you want the halachic answer, why do we drink 4 cups? Because Chachamim instituted 4 times kosher bracha. Now, when you make Kiddush Friday night, or make Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat, or if you stand under the chuppah, if the Rav's Masada Kiddushin, if you've been honored to say a bracha, they give you the cup in the hand. That is very, very important, because if the cup is sitting on the table and you're speaking, there is no connection between that which we're saying and that which there is a cup on the table. So we hold the cup. And here there are different customs on Kiddush. Do you hold it on the bottom? Do you hold it on the side? That you do what your grandfather did, okay? They are not here to discuss that. But you have to hold the cup. So in Volozhin and in Brisk, the Rav reported to us, Magid is the entire Haggadah. So how long did they spend on Magid? So Afilu kulanu chachamim, kulanu novunim, kulanu yodim et haTorah, mitzvah lesaper b'chol hamarbe re'ez mishubach. It could be several hours. It could be several hours that they're sitting there and talking about Magid. In Volozhin and in Brisk, they held the cup when they were saying the Haggadah. So everybody was looking, wow, they held the cup for 2.5 hours? I mean, that's a little bit difficult. So the Rav calmed us down and said, no. They held the cup when they read each section. Just as we hold the cup for V'hisha Amda Lavotenu, and we pick up the cup for Leficha Chanachnu Chayavim Lahodot, and we pick up the cup for the Bracha Asher Ge'alanu V'Gal Avotenu, so we pick it up here and there, just to remember that we should have picked it up every single stanza and every single paragraph, but Yalda Chulsha La'olam, we became weaklings, so we don't do it. But in Brisk and Volozhin, they weren't weaklings, and they held the cup. I know they were weaklings when it comes to fast days, I know. But they held the cup every time they were reading. They were holding the cup of wine throughout the discussion of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. But then when they got to the break in a paragraph and they had something to say and expand, they put the cup down on the table. So they weren't really holding the cup for 2 hours. But nevertheless, the idea that they held it was because it's kos shel bracha. Now the question is, I mentioned that on Kiddush, you only have to drink a little bit, a malod lugma, fill up a cheekful, and that's it. But on Seder night, you really have to drink the whole cup of wine, and at least drink the majority of the cup. Now, this is important because if there is a minimum quantitative value of a revi'it. So we mentioned here in Israel, we talk in terms of 86 milliliters. In North America, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says 3.3 fluid ounces. If you take a very large goblet that holds 3 times that amount, so you still have to finish the entire cup or drink the majority of it. So it's not such a smart thing to use a very large goblet for 4 cups. You should use a respectable miniature, not too small, but it should have the minimum amount, not much more than that, so that you should be able to drink the entire cup or at least majority of the cup. And if somebody would ask me, but again, I'm not here as anybody's shul rabbi, what is preferred? What is the preferred option? To drink good, solid wine, but I really can't hold my wine for 4 cups. So I'll drink the majority of 4 cups of wine, or 4 cups of grape juice, but grape juice, I can down the whole cup. What is better? What is the preferred option? The answer is to go with the grape juice, the preferred option, because it is halachically preferable to finish the entire cup of wine, because that is a symbol that you are free and that you have no problem of where the next cup is coming from. The idea of saving food. I mean, I have some experience with Holocaust survivors who, Baruch Hashem, are living and made it through and living relatively comfortable life. They always leave over something. There is still something there that maybe there won't be food for the next meal. Even though the refrigerator is packed and the pantry is packed with food, they just cannot finish to the last morsel because they were so indoctrinated that in order to survive, they better save some food for maybe a few hours later or for tomorrow. And the idea that you finish the last drop of wine or grape juice is a symbol that you know that you are comfortable enough to know that for the next cup, there's going to be another bottle coming out of wherever it comes out of, the wine cellar. So this is an expression of chirut. Now here, there is an issue, a serious issue, about whether every single person on the table has to drink his or her own wine. That's the Rambam's opinion. We read it, and it's clear. You don't have to be a Reb Chaim Soloveitchik from Brisk to snuff it out. He says, Kol echad ve'echad bein anashim bein nashim. Can't get clearer than that. Every individual, man or woman, has to have their own 4 cups of wine. But the authors of the Tosfot saw it differently. They saw it differently, and they thought that it is conceivable that one person, like Kiddush Friday night, makes Kiddush, and that person drinks the wine. And everybody fulfills their obligation of the Arba Kosot. And that could be, that's the opinion of the authors of the Tosfot. Reb Chaim, the Reb's grandfather, was amazed that such a view could exist, but it actually does exist. It's the view of the authors of the Tosfot. Now that's not our halacha. Our halacha is, at least it's our custom, that everybody has their cups of wine. Everybody, man, woman, and child, we give them cups of wine for the Seder night. But the Rav told the story, and it was printed in the OU's Masorah, volume number 7, that during World War I, with the upheaval in Eastern Europe, so the town of Brisk was overrun by Russians. And Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, who dies in 1918, so this story takes place maybe in 1914, 1915, flees the town for Chasalovich, where his son, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, who's the Rav's father, was serving then as the town rabbi. And in the midst of war, the provisions were so meager that there really was not enough wine to go around for everybody at the Seder. There was enough wine basically for one person at the Seder, and you had various people in the family at that Seder. And they decided that because of what's known as Sha'at Atchak, a crisis moment, an emergency situation, they have no other recourse but to accept the view of the Tosfot that one person can make the bracha Borei Peri Hagafen 4 times over on Seder night, drink the wine, and everybody has kavanah, everybody has focus and concentration that they have fulfilled their obligation of the 4 cups of wine. And hence, according to the Tosfot, the koshel bracha that you have for the 4 cups of wine is not qualitatively different than Kiddush and Havdalah, in the sense that you can invoke the halacha of shomea ke'oneh. If somebody hears it, the bracha, it's as if he himself said the bracha. But here it's going even a step further. It's not only hearing the Borei Peri Hagafen, but it's also viewing the drinking of the wine and accepting it as if you drank the wine. So obviously, these great Soloveitchiks would never have said that for Am Yisrael for generations to come. And of course, the Rav never said this, that we should do this in our Seder. But he was relating a moment of the history of the family where, and this is halachically very important, where the other view that did not become mainstream in halacha, sometimes you have no other recourse but to take it out of the freezer and defrost it and use that view. I think we just went through a year of Corona where we took so many halachic views that were stashed away in the freezer and had to defrost them and use them. My fear, and I'm speaking now from a person from the active rabbinate, my fear is that nobody's going to put them back in the freezer again when things get better. And this is an issue because sometimes mid-course corrections are made because of crisis moments, and then they're just kept. There are many, many examples of this. So we're now struggling to get people to go back to shul, by the way. Were you allowed to go back to shul? Oh, it's convenient to have the minyan in the backyard, in the alleyways, in the parking lots. You don't have to pay dues for the minyan in the parking lots. So this is something that we're trying to work on with people. They should understand there's a community obligation to keep up the minyan, and you have to explain the halachic advantages of a makom tefillah, and outside the street is not a makom tefillah. It can be used in an emergency situation. And the whole business of having somebody on a porch join a minyan of 8-9 people down below, that's a far cry that this should become mainstream. It's a very, very, very touchy issue here. And there are people who are doing it. And now there are people who can easily enough come outside because things are opening up in Israel, but they're still on the porch. And, I try to explain sometimes to people and they get insulted. What do you mean? Rav Shabbat said it's okay. Yeah, he said it's okay last year when everybody was in lockdown. There's a big difference, a very, very, very big difference. So when Rav Velvela and the Rav's uncle and his father, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, spent Pesach together in Chasilovich in the middle of World War I, they weren't saying this should be the halacha for generations. They were in a moment of crisis and whipped out the view of the Tosfot and so on. So this was very, very important. Now we're going to try to understand the Keneged Arba'a L'Shanot Geula, corresponding. So I said that this is our allusions to philosophical ideas. Why did the Torah speak in terms of 4 expressions of redemption? Votzeti, Bitzalti, Bigalti, Velakachti, because obviously there are 4 different modes of enslavement, of bondage, if you may. One is political. You're stuck in a country, you can't get out. You could be in prison, or you could not be in prison, but you can't get out. Former Soviet Union. I mean, we don't have to go that far. We remember the scenario. You couldn't get out. You were stuck there. That was political bondage, without a doubt. Am Yisrael, they were in political bondage in Egypt. The next thing is you have theological bondage. Chachamim talk about the fact that Am Yisrael were stooped in 49 rungs of Tumah, Mem Tet Sharei Tumah. That means that the pagan practices that were going around in the Egyptian culture, it was part of them as well. And the idea that the Kabbalists explained that this 49 days of the Omer to arrive at Har Sinai was to get us out of the 49 rungs of Tumah. And we had to do that. That was spiritual redemption, because we were spiritually and theologically even in Galut. Rambam tells us that Shevet Levi were a little bit exceptional to this, but that's a story about Shevet Levi. But Am Yisrael generally were involved in what was there. I mean, this is what brought the Rambam in the Guide to the Perplexed to suggest that the Mishkan was a type of method of service of God, but at least resembled somewhat that which they saw in Egypt. So, but to get them out of the mode, we couldn't just make a snap of a finger and say, there's no more temple, there's no more sacrifices, no more this, no more that. So Kadosh Baruch Hu designed a Jewish way of doing things in accordance with the Torah. But it's an acknowledgement that we were deeply, deeply involved in that kind of pagan activity. And the third has to do with economics. When you're a slave, there's an economic mode that basically says something about there's no such thing as a free work day, no such thing as a day off. Rambam tells us that the reason that Shabbat not only carries with it the creation theme, but also the redemption from Egypt theme. Ki hu yom tchila lemikra'ei kodesh, zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim, we say every Friday night. So what does it mean, ki hu yom tchila lemikra'ei kodesh? Simply to translate and interpret that line. So many people say Kiddush Friday night, don't understand what this means. It means open up Vayikra Kav Gimel, Parshat Emor. Ele Moadei Hashem Mikra'ei Kodesh, Asher Tikru'u Otam B'Moadam. Here is the schedule of the Chagim. What is the first one on the list? Shabbat. And everybody asks, why is Shabbat there? We want to talk about Pesach, Sfirat HaOmer, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Vaydaber Moshe et Moadei Hashem B'nei Yisrael. Where does Shabbat come in there? The answer is that Shabbat is also a Moed. It's also a Moed. And the Rambam in the guide explains that in Egypt, we did not have a day off. And we received, the first thing that we received after the Yam Suf, after we came out the other side of the Red Sea, the Split Sea, at Marah, 3 days later, we received several commandments, at least some skeleton form of some commandments, and one of them was Shabbat. One was Shabbat. Where do you see that they received Shabbat? Just keep reading in Parshat B'Shalach. Al Yetzei Ish Mimkomo B'Yom HaShvi'i. The man would fall 6 days and would not fall on the 7th day. So there was some pristine format of Shabbat given way before the Torah was given, before Zachot Yom Shabbat HaKadsho. And the Rambam says this was a rectification of a social injustice. So there was a Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim built into Shabbat. Not only do you have the creation theme as well. So you have a type of exodus on an economic level. We can think differently, we can work differently, we can have a whole culture of earning and lending and helping and so on. What we do with our money is also a redemptive idea. It's not just just making a living and stacking up a lot of funds so that we can have extra vacation homes and so on. No. The whole purpose of the Torah viewpoint of the economy is so that we should be able to help people down the road. I can tell you that in the book that I just published, the Vahi Ben Sah Ha'aron, 70 conversations in transit with Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik Zal when I was his driver in the 70s. So we had conversations, and one of them had to do with tzedakah. So I had heard a rumor that the Rav was giving 60% of his earnings for charity. Now, and I asked him about it in the car. I mean, it's a chutzpah thing to ask. The Rav could have just ignored me. Or he could have said, it's none of my business. Could have said a lot of things. He said, you obviously forgot a pasuk in Kohelet. Oh, really? Which pasuk in Kohelet did I forget? Ki adam ein tzadik ba'aretz asher ya'aseh tov v'lo yecheta. Every single human being has at least one sin. So he responded in a humoristic manner. And he said, after 120 years, God's going to accuse him of overdosing on tzedakah, and he will say, guilty as charged, with a big smile. This is what he told me. And he said, the truth is, because my question was, based on what the Rambam says, it's based on the Masechet Horayot, it says clearly that al yibazbez yoter michomesh, don't waste more than a fifth, which is, you are obligated to give 10%, but there's a 20% upper limit. So 60% is a fortune of money to give to tzedakah. And the Rav basically told me, look, I don't have expenses. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu put money in my bank account so I can help people. And those who knew of the Rav's great tzedakah, philanthropic, he had money. I don't want to get into this. He had money, he had serious money. And he did help a lot of people on a private level and on a community level. And he didn't think that there was a problem here, that he overdosed on tzedakah. And he said, Kadosh Baruch Hu, fine, do something to me. This is what I did. And I have confirmation from some of the grandchildren in Israel of the Rav that indeed this was the case. He really gave a tremendous amount of tzedakah. So he was redeemed on an economic level for sure, no doubt. And then there's the social level, integrating with the Egyptians. Well, Rashi tells us, "V'chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim," the pasuk in B'Shalach, 1 out of 5 went out of Egypt. Now Rashi has kind words for Am Yisrael, because the Medrash gives 2 other opinions. Echad me'chamishim, 1 out of 50 left Egypt, means 98 out of 100 stayed in Egypt. And then third view is Echad me'chamesh me'ot, 1 out of 500 left Egypt. So Rashi takes the opinion 1 out of 5, 20% left. So let's take the 20%. 80%, what happened to them? So Rashi says, died in the plague of darkness. You know what the plague of darkness is? Everyone sitting here knows what the plague of darkness is. It's the absence of Torah light. Absence of Torah light is the plague of darkness. And are there not so many Jews in the Western world today suffering from the plague of darkness and getting lost? That's what happened in Egypt. They got lost. Simple as that. They got lost. And they were never to be recovered. I believe that's the 5th son, who we talked about last week, the 5th son. He's not even at the Seder, not the Russia. He's just not even there any longer. So you have the 4 different types of enslavements: political, theological, spiritual, economic, and social. All of these require redemption. And it shows that you can be redeemed partially as well. Our Chachamim use the term Gula Shlema, full redemption. You know why? Because they entertained the possibility of partial redemption. And if you take our contemporary situation today, are we fully redeemed? No, no. According to Rabbeinu Hananel and others, as long as there's no Beit HaMikdash up and running, we still have to fast all the other fast days, Tisha B'Av and Asar B'Tevet, Tzom Gedalia, and so on, because because we're not fully redeemed. But to say that we're still stuck in all the levels of Galut, that's a lie. It's a lie. I mean, we have, Baruch Hashem, pulled ourselves out of that. Ein ben Yemot HaMashiach just to be an independent state is something. Rabbi Akiva understood that with Bar Kochba. He understood that, and and the Chashmonaim understood that. An independent Jewish state in Eretz Israel, irrespective of who's on top of the government, irrespective. And I say this Erev election days in Israel, but it's not a big deal because we have it 4 times a year, election day. It's no big deal anymore. Depends when you start counting the year. The Rambam tells us that the Chashmonaim, it led to 200 years of Jewish independence until the Churban, until the destruction. But the Rambam forgot that there was a Yanai HaMelech, there were all kinds of terrible kings who ruled, Jewish kings who ruled. Yet that was better than being under Roman domination or Greek domination. Independence. So we daven for Gulash Shlema. Gulash Shlema. We talk about the Shana Ba Yerushalayim Habenuya, fully rebuilt. But Yerushalayim is not the Churban now. We have a big problem with Nachim. On Tisha B'Av, Rav Goren addressed this issue many, many years ago. You don't want to say a lie. How can you say every word of the traditional Nachim when you're sitting in built up Yerushalayim? How can you say it? So there are ways to doctor up the text. I know the Rav was against this, and he felt that we should not tamper with the text. He had good reason for that. So I believe the best solution is to have in mind Har HaBayit. Just focus on Har HaBayit, and all the words are appropriate, because we're not there. We're locked out. We're really locked out, and so on. But these are issues, which means that Atchalta de Gula, the beginning of redemptive process, has begun. This is a phrase that Al Chachamim use. It's not modern religious Zionism. Al Chachamim spoke of Atchalta de Gula, the beginning of, which means you can have partial Geula. But we talk about the full Geula, the Geula Shlema. So you have the 4 levels of redemption. By the way, the Gemara tells us that in Yecheskel HaNavi, you have 4 parallel, not the same words, but 4 parallel expressions of redemption for the final redemption as well, which means there will be some reflection of the Gulat Mitzrayim in the final redemption as well. But the Gemara tells us that it goes beyond the 4 expressions of redemption. It's against the 4 cups of the wine, goblets in the dream of the butler of the Sar Mashkim. What's that all about? Well, that episode brought Yosef to power, as we know, by properly interpreting the dream of the Sar Mashkim, restoring his credibility and his position. Yosef ascends to becoming the vice king, the Mishneh LaMelech, and this eventually brings Yaakov and the family down, which means, to a certain degree, these are the first steps of the galut, of the exile. And on Seder night, it is extremely important not to push anything under the rug. We don't start the story when things are great. We start the story when things went sour. Matchil bignut u'misayem b'shevach. We begin with the matters that did not really bring glory. So there's a discussion in the Gemara. Do we talk about the political side? Avadim hayinu, the Pharaoh b'Mitzrayim, we were slaves and God took us out. But don't forget, we were slaves. Or do you start with Metchila of the Avodah Zarah Hayu Avotenu? We were idol worshippers. Can you imagine today when people, sometimes people who do shidduchim, so I heard this from my family in New York, that they make you fill out a form. And what's interesting in the form, I laughed because the most important things that should be on the form are not there. What about the character of the people involved? They just forgot to ask those questions. They want to know which youth group the grandmother went to, was she a B'nai Akiva or not? Because if she went to B'nai Akiva, in certain circles, so it's already a automatic knockout. It's a terrible, terrible way of trying to consider a shidduch. Very, very bad. Oh, okay, my grandfather. Who was your grandfather? He was Terach. He was Terach. He was an idol worshiper. Put that into that. The boy or girl will never get a shidduch. But on Seder night, we don't fudge it. We say it. Mitchila of the Avodah Zarah. It started with Terach. And that's how it started. Now, Avraham Avinu was a hero that he went against the grain. Everybody was on one side of the river and he was on the other side. And that was very heroic on the part of Avraham Avinu. And we struggled with such terachs. You think in First Temple era, Beit Rishon, we didn't have problems with idol worshippers. We had idol worshippers. So in all likelihood, and every single one of our forefathers somewhere down the road, they were idol worshippers. It's not a nice thing. It's not pleasant to talk about. But on Seder night, we talk about that too. I remember the whole issue in the United States, in the Civil War in 1861, 1865, and so on. I remember going as a school trip to Washington, D.C. in 1965, and we went to the Congress, okay, and it was the filibuster for the Civil Rights Acts. For Civil Rights Acts, 100 years after the Civil War, they were still trying to legislate Civil Rights Acts because the Black Americans did not yet have freedom after 100 years of war. And I remember the culture when they made the movie Roots, it was like a very big chidush. Wow, Roots, because they didn't talk about roots. They weren't interested in talking about roots. The halacha is this moror. Don't forget the bad times. Matchil begnut u'mesayem b'shevach. So that's why the Yerushalmi says, corresponding to the 4 cups of wine of the Sarah Mashkin, let's take it back to the beginning of the Galut. So that's another illusion. And then there's a future illusion, and that's the 4 empires. Because and the question is, who are the 4 empires? But if we just enumerate Mitzrayim as 1, Egypt, Babel, Babylon as a 2nd, Paras and Madai perhaps the 3rd, and Edom, Rome the 4th, and the Catholic Church took over from Edom, and here we are today. We're now looking ahead into history, the historic 4 cups of wine. You have different reasons that we have the 4 cups of wine. But if I want to focus a moment on the historic, so there's interesting halacha. We make 4 brachot, Bor Pergafen on Seder night. What do you mean we? Who's we? Well, most of us, I believe, do it like this. It's the Rambam's view, and it's mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. You know, the Ashkenazi position in the Middle Ages, the Balei HaTosfot said, no, you only make a Bor Pergafen for Kiddush, but there's no need for another Bor Pergafen after Gaal Yisrael because you didn't really have a hefsek. Your mind is still focused, so you can drink the 2nd cup of wine without a Bor Pergafen. But then we eat and there's a hefsek. Certainly there's an interruption. So after Birkat Hamazon benching, we say again Bor Pergafen. But then again after Hallel, there's no need because you haven't broke your focus and attention. So according to the Tosfot and the Rosh Rabbi Asher ben Yechiel, you make 2 brachot Bor Pergafen. For the 1st and the 3rd, but the 2nd and the 4th come along for the ride. That's all. That's the way they understand it. Well, to paraphrase a Mishnah, Shtayim Shehein Arba, 2 brachot that are really 4 cups. Okay. The Rambam says each one is individual because each cup symbolizes something else. But apparently, according to the Ashkenazi point of view, that it's 4 cups, but 2 groupings, the first 2 and the last 2, it smacks of something the Rav explained about tefillin and Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. Everybody has 4 parshas in the tefillin Shalosh. The only problem is the order. The order, where there is a chronological order in the Torah. That's the classical view today. Kaddish li kol bechor v'haya k'biacha shma v'yam shemoah. But in the Rabbeinu Tam, 3 and 4 becomes 4 and 3. V'yam shemoah and shma at the end. And the Rav explained that really it's also in order. Looks like it's out of order. Parshat Ekev is after Parshat V'etchanan. But the Rav said what you do is you start reading it from one side, in one direction to Kadesh li kol bechor v'yakivecha, and then jump to the other side and read it in order, Shema and Vayam Shemoah. Why did Rabbeinu Tam insist that? To show that the 4 parshiot have 2 messages. Message number 1 is the commitment to Klal Yisrael. That's Parshat Bo. Parshat Bo is Am Yisrael information and our commitment to the nation. And in Sefer Dvarim, which is V'etchanan and Ekev, the last 2 parshiot in the Tefillin, it's the human being, it's the Jew standing before God as an individual. It's a classic idea of the Rav of Kedushat Tzibur and Kedushat Yachid, the sanctity of the community, sanctity of the individual, and it can be well developed. But I believe this may play into the Ashkenazi thinking, which is not practiced by Ashkenazim, I say again, to have only 2 brachot Borei Gafen and creating somehow 2, which are really 4, 2 packages because there is a Klal Yisrael theme, and that's Kiddush, and the Geula from Mitzrayim, that's us, that's Am Yisrael. But then there's a universal theme. The Rav once explained that in the bracha of Shomea Tfilah every day, 3 times a day, we say Ki ata Shomea Tfilat Amcha Yisrael Barachamim. That's if you daven Ashkenaz. If you daven Eidot HaMizrach or Nusach Chabad or Nusach Ari, you say Ki ata Shomea Tfilat Kol Peh. Now that becomes the accepted Nusach now in Eretz Yisrael, by the way, in Nusach Sfard. But if you daven like a Chosid, it's Ki ata Shomea Tfilat Kol Peh Amcha Yisrael Barachamim. You get it all in. And the Rav said it's not kfilut, it's not duplicity. Why? The Shmoneh Esrei is divided into 2 parts. The first part are human needs. Jew and non-Jew alike require da'at, intelligence, require repentance and forgiveness, require health, require sustenance. Barech Aleinu. These are universal ideas. But then there are uniquely Jewish ideas. Kibbutz Goliyot, ingathering of the exiles, the establishment of the Sanhedrin, Hashivenu, Hashiva Shavtenu Kvarishana, V'Yerushalayim Mircha, Etzemach David. These are very, very Jewish things. So the Nusach Sfard picked up on the first half. Ki ata shomea tfilat kol peh. God listens to every mouth. This is a universal request. And the second, the Ashkenaz version, is focusing on the second half. Ki ata shomea tfilat amcha Yisrael barachamim. And because they reflect 2 different things and they're not in contradiction, the Rav justified the Chassidic Nusach Sfard, as they say, Ki ata shomea tfilat kol peh amcha Yisrael barachamim. It's not extra, like somebody saying, Chonenu miyatcha chochma bina v'da'at de'ah bina v'askel. That's extra. Shouldn't do that. And just like you shouldn't do, V'tov beinecha levarech et amcha Yisrael b'chol eita v'chol sha'a b'shlomecha b'rov oz v'shalom. That's extra. Take your pick. V'tov beinecha levarech et amcha Yisrael b'rov oz v'shalom, or v'tov beinecha levarech et amcha Yisrael b'chol eita v'chol sha'a b'shlomecha. One or the other. But Ki ata shomea tfilat kol peh amcha Yisrael barachamim can live. They can live together under one roof. So you have here 2 different types. So the first 2 cups of wine as a grouping is Am Yisrael. The second 2 is universal. Number 1, eating. Not only Jews eat, Goyim eat as well. Eating and thanking God for the ability to produce food is a universal concern. And Hallel, which Hallel are we saying on Seder night? Nishmat Kol Chai. Everyone, every neshama of the entire universe can praise God, should praise God. It's a universal theme. So we end with that second type of expression of Nishmat Kol Chai, which in itself is very, very telling to explain the halachic side of why there are only 2 brachot of the Borei Gafen for the 4 cups of wine. But again, our custom is that we all make brachot 4 times over in accordance with the Rambam, and we view each particular section as an independent mitzvah with its independent thoughts and philosophies. And just to end this, so if there are 4 malchiot, and hopefully we're exiting from the galiyot, all the various exiles, how the Chachamim was so witty when they talked in the 3rd chapter of the Mishnah, Masechet Psachim, about various drinks and cereals that are chametz. So just listen to this phrase. Elu ovrim b'pesach, kutach habavli, shechar hamadi, chometz ha'edomi, zitum hamitzri. You know, sometimes you have a Chinese noodles, right? You have a phrase like that. You attach a certain nationality to a food, right? An Italian this, a Greek salad, whatever. The idea that Chachamim were aware that there were certain, dishes that were prepared that carried a national label to them, because this may have been the food of the nation. What are they? They're Bavel. Madai is Parasu Madai. Edom and Mitzrayim. They somehow snuck in the Arba Malchiot, the 4 empires that Am Yisrael had to deal with, and even in a subtle way of teaching us about which kinds of foods might be not permissible for Pesach because they're chametz or have some chametz derivative. It carries with it the Arba Malchiot as well. And Baruch Hashem, we are today sitting here in an expanded world today, and in a closed world. The world is large, but the world is very close. Many of you sitting in all different parts of the world, and we're talking to each other. And well, I'm actually talking to you, but at least you're in on this conversation or monologue. The fact is that the Zohar, the Kabbalistic literature, speaks of that in Messianic days, the entire land of Eretz Yisrael will be considered Yerushalayim, and the entire world will be considered Eretz Yisrael. Now that's a dangerous thing to say to Jews abroad. Very dangerous, because you might think, all right, that sounds great, so I don't have to move, I don't have to think about it. It's a non-halachic statement, but it simply means that in the Messianic days, there's going to be an upgrade in terms of sanctity of place. That's what it means. But nevertheless, the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael and the Kedusha of Yerushalayim, these are halachic terms, and God willing, each and every one of you should have the zchut to be Ola Regel one day to Yerushalayim. And people are coming around here in Eretz Yisrael that you're not necessarily a fanatic if you believe in the rebuilding of Beit HaMikdash. Some people used to think that you're a religious fanatic, but it's not fanaticism at all. It's mainstream. And I'm happy to say that in many of the Sephardi families, even though they may not be completely, fully religious Torah observant Jews, but they're very, very traditional and deeply believing Jews. So my kids taught me the phrase dati light. They're a little bit light on the dati, but you can count on them to fast on Yom Kippur and make a seder, and certainly kosher. They're careful. Tarat mishpacha, they're very careful, and many mitzvot. On some things they're a little bit lax, but that's a question of education. And God willing, we will try to educate and inspire, because that's really the key word in education, not to force it down people's throats, but to inspire them. I know some of the Rabbanim in the United States and Canada did so well in this particular area of inspiration. And that's really what we have to do a little bit better, improve a little bit more. Maybe we can learn something from the Corona about getting together and cooperating and so on. And it'll be a great day for Am Yisrael. So I'd like to wish each and every one of you Chag Kasher B'Sameach. This is what we say here in Israel. And I tell people Kasher, it's for sure going to be, because on bleach, there are already 3 hashgachot on the bleach for Pesach. But just don't drink the bleach. Do me a favor. With all the hashgachot that it's kosher to Pesach, don't drink it. Not good. Not a good idea. But the idea, in all seriousness, kasher it's going to be. I'm not worried about that. But it should be sameach. It should be real simcha, that people should have a satisfaction that we're getting out of this Mitzrayim of our year. And really, it's a Yetziat Mitzrayim. We're feeling it now in Eretz Yisrael. You should all feel it, whether in Toronto and any other place. You should feel this exodus that is beginning to happen. And we are beginning to identify with B'chol Dovador Chayav Adam Lirot Et Atzmo Ki'ilu Yatza Mitzrayim. It's really a genuine sensation, and it should be Bemet B'Serot Tovot, should be good tidings for each and every one of you. Thank you for being online and for participating in the shir.
Questions?
I'll be happy.
Rav Adler, could you clarify with the 4 cups of wine? You said the actual, they're not birchos nanim. They're the reason for the 4 cups is for the mitzvahs that we're going to do. But we still have to drink 4 cups of wine.
Right. So I'm glad you pointed that out. That's a very, very important point, and even an oversight on my part. In Kiddush, I mentioned that the critical part is the kosher bracha. There is an aspect of drinking because it kicks off the meal, but it's not an integral part of the actual Kiddush per se. And as I illustrated with under the chuppah, if the rabbi makes the bar peregofen, he does not necessarily drink. There's an additional mitzvah of drinking the 4 cups of wine, while it is on Seder night. While it is kosher bracha in every sense of the word, it's also birkat hane'enin. It's also for the purpose of allowing you to drink wine, And so much so, it's the proof is it's not just below lugma, a streakful, but it's to drink the whole cup and at least to drink the majority of the cup, which means you're quite correct. There's an absolute requirement that the cup should be drunk. And according to Ashkenazim, everybody. According to the Tosfot, at least the person who made the bracha should do the drinking of the wine. Correct. Thank you for the comment.
Thank you.
Keach, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Let's say that. Okay. Be well. Shalom, shalom.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kotev. Shalom. Shalom.